days after the death of Liz were surreal. You know how it is to go to a person's house expecting to see them. I knew she was dead, but I still wanted to see her, still expected to see her. I guess in time it goes away, but it was a long time before it went away for me. Then the clearing of the house started, and Warren struggled. Lord, did my kids struggle with it all. I remember him coming over one night and just sitting there talking to me, saying how he had no one left. It was just him all on his own, and as he was talking, I noticed what looked like a shadow dark behind him. And in that moment, I knew it was more than just the loss of Liz. This was an attack, a spiritual attack. I started to ask him a few questions like, has he been feeling heavy or afraid? And he says yes. Right then and there, I rebuke it in the name of Jesus, and I bind that wicked spirit trying to kill him. I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but that is the end goal of all demonic spirits, for you to die in sin and join them in hell. Warren, in that moment, realized what was going on with him. He went into tears and said, "Dad, I'm not sure what to do." I told him, "Son, no worries. I will help you." Over the next week, it seemed like everything around us was mourning. I remember the birds, quails, 50 of them, landed on Liz's house. I remember looking at them and thinking that these animals are paying their respects. I didn't realize how right I was until one evening I'm there with Warren and Jewel. I went out the back door and was just standing there. When I looked out into the woods in the dark places, the places where there was no light shining, I could see eye shine all over the place, green eye shine. It was just there, looking at the house. I didn't feel like I was in danger. In fact, I felt great sadness. It was overwhelming, and it was right then and there in that moment that I realized Liz meant something to what was in those woods. She represented more than just a woman. Liz was a peacekeeper. How do I know that? Because a week later, it's Friday night, I'm in bed, and it sounds like a T-Rex is outside in the woods. This roaring goes on for over an hour, like there was a challenge being offered. Now I'm outside in the backyard listening when I see those Indians again. It was when I saw them, I knew there was about to be a fight somewhere in the woods. One of them looks at me and then walks into the woods. There is another one just standing there, looking at me, staring, so much so that I say, "What do you want?" But it just stays there staring and looking. Again, I hear this roar and I'm like, "Whoa, what in the hell is going on?" I got something roaring in the woods and this dude over here is looking at me like I owe him money. So I decide to go inside and get a bottle of water. As I'm walking in the door, the voice in my head, which I now know is God, says, "So when are you going to pray and deal with that?" Pause right here and let me say this. Understanding the voice of God was a challenge. Why? Because I had to learn that it is possible for other things to speak to you in your head as well. When God gave us dominion and authority, every spirit knew and understood that if they wanted to participate in the realm of the earth, they needed a partner that was human. So they try to force themselves on you with negative thoughts to bring you into fear. If I were to tell you the kinds of things I faced to hear God's voice, it would intimidate you. However, instead, I'm going to share with you a cheat code. God is His Word, and when you study His Word, then you will know who is speaking to you. You do this by knowing not necessarily what God is, but more so what He is not. Example, God is not the author of confusion, so if you find yourself having confusing thoughts, that is not God. The best way to know what God is and what He is not, you have to study His Word. His Word is His Son. Hence, as you study, you get to know Jesus. What you will then understand is that warfare will happen no matter what. There is no escaping it. You cannot hide. You have to deal with it. If not, someone else in your family will have to deal with it. I'm sorry, let me get back to the story. So God says, when are you going to pray about this? And I'm thinking, what am I supposed to do with these things fighting in the woods? They clearly have an issue with each other. What am I supposed to do? Then nothing, radio silence. I get the bottle of water and go back outside and sit down. I'm not sure if you have ever heard a Bigfoot, I mean an alpha male Bigfoot roar. but there is nothing like that sound. It cannot be mistaken. As that Bigfoot is responding, the Lord says, "Son, you need to stop this before it starts." As I'm there thinking up, Warren walks around the side of the house and he says, "Dad, I'm not sure what is going on, but they don't act this way. Something is crazy." I ask him if this has happened before, out of the blue, and he says yes, when his grandpa died. I ask, "What did Liz do?" He says he doesn't know. He remembers her walking outside, but he didn't go. Again, I pray, but I don't know what to pray, and then I hear, "Coward." Oh, it's clear as day, coward. As that is being said, I see those Indians starting to manifest in the woods all around, and Warren is like, "What the hell is going on?" Again, I hear, "Coward," then I hear, "Speak." So I just start to pray, "Father, I come before you asking for assistance with what is going on around me right now. I don't even know what to say, but I turn my tongue over to you. You speak to what is there and bring it to heal." Now, it was at this point where I can honestly say I do not remember what came out of my mouth. I do remember zooming past the Indians that were standing there. Like my spirit was taken out of my body, I remember looking back and seeing Warren below me, standing next to my body with his hand on my shoulder. Then just light. The brightest light I have ever seen, light that felt like it burned, and me saying, "Oh, it hurts." Then I saw this ruin. It was like a stone building on top of the hills in the woods. It was being rebuilt and then destroyed at the same time. Each brick that was placed was crushed as it was put in place. Then there came this fist that smashes this ruin, and by ruin, I mean it was a stone building. It was smashed into dust, fine powder. Then, just like that, I was standing next to Warren when I opened my eyes. It felt like I had been hit by a truck. Looking at him, he had this look on his face like, "What in the hell is going on?" In that moment, I hear what sounds like trees parting and moving and look towards the woods, and back off in the distance like 20 feet in the air are these eyes looking down on me and Warren. These eyes are glowing on their own like freaking flashlights, and it was like something as tall as the trees, moving them and looking at us. The freakiest thing that happened, it was like whatever it was wanted us to see its eyes, because seconds later you hear trees bending and the eyes are gone. Then that roar happens again, like a freaking T-Rex, and nothing, just silence. After that, I remember Warren helping me inside to the sofa and saying, "I will stay with you," and then him calling my wife. When I woke up, there was blood on my shirt, and when I asked Warren, who was sleeping in the recliner, what happened, he said, "Honestly, I don't know, but you need to sleep," but I was hungry. Looking at the clock, it was 4 a.m., and I was starving. So I went into the kitchen and made a sandwich. Warren went back to sleep. I went to check on my wife, and she was out cold. So I go back outside and sit and eat my sandwich. And again, I hear the trees moving, and look in the distance and see those same large eyes. Eyes so big they look like two green floodlights 12 feet apart. And then God says, "Son, you binded them. They are looking for you to let them leave before the sun rises. Tell them to go in peace." So I say, go in peace and stop this madness. Now, I don't know how else to describe this, but have you seen where companies use ship anchor chains to clear the woods? They connect the chains to 2 bulldozers, then they pull the chains, knocking down everything in between. That is what it sounded like when these 2 things left. It sounded like everything in the area broke, ripped, and torn into pieces. When the sun came up, I was wide awake, so I went into the woods to see. Listen, it was not until then that I realized they were way closer than I thought. 95 yards into those woods were 2 trails of destruction, like 2 freaking bulldozers took off straight in opposite directions. That was the day I came to realize that they were not afraid of me. I was nothing, but they were afraid of the Spirit of God in me. An even more important lesson was that being a coward was unacceptable in God's kingdom. I mean, completely unacceptable. There is one thing we fear in the kingdom of heaven, and that is the King himself. Let me stop right here and give you an opportunity to join the kingdom. It's simple and it's private between you and God. Just repeat after me. Jesus Christ, come into my heart. I invite you in. Give me your renewed mind. I believe you died for my sins, and I accept you as my Savior. Now back to my story. Over the next few days, there was this peace in the woods that was amazing. It felt like everything dark had been pushed back. That was the beginning of what I call the time of dominion over the woods. I started to take longer walks in the woods and learn even more from God. It was amazing, the lessons that I was taught. It was a season of peace. Warren and Jewel became closer, and her father Norman would come over and hang out with me. I learned more about him and his childhood. I asked him how things had been around the house, and he said ever since he was with Liz, his life had been amazing. There was so much peace that it took me a while to realize that Gordon had not been around. My wife was the one who brought it to my attention. She said, "Honey, where is Gordon? I called for him, and he is not answering." So I headed over to his place, and his truck was there, but no answer, so I went around to the side of the house, got his spare key, and went inside. There was no sign of Gordon. What I mean is, it was like he had not been home. However, there were no cell phones back in those days, so I had to wait. When I tell you I was going to Gordon's house every morning, I went to his house every morning looking for him for a week, then I got worried. I started praying with my wife, and the next day we got a phone call, and it was Gordon. He said he was down in Louisiana fishing and hunting. He was excited, saying he had booked a little airboat fishing and hunting tour, and that he was sorry he didn't tell anyone. Well, you can imagine how concerned we were about him, considering everything that was going on. But I was fine just knowing that he was all right. Another day passes, and he calls me again. This time it's 8:30, and you can hear fear in his voice. "Stop right here. I need you to understand there was no internet, no cell phones, nothing in those days. We had no clue that these creatures were anywhere other than in our woods. We thought it was an isolated occurrence." Well, Gordon says that the cabin he and the other two guys are in is not in the swamps of Louisiana, but on the outskirts, and that he had to walk over to the main little restaurant to call me. I ask what's wrong, and he says he is seeing eyeshine like what we see back at home here. I can tell that Gordon is afraid and in the process of being made completely afraid. My response is, "So, what's the problem? You have dealt with this before." And Gordon explains, "Yes, I have, on my land. This is not my land. I'm not sure if this will work here." As he is talking, you hear a woman saying, "You can't tie up our phone all night. We have customers calling in to make orders, honey." He says, "I just need a few more minutes." Then he says he is not sure what to do, and frankly, I wasn't sure either. I say, "Listen, maybe you and the guys should just leave." He says, "I suggested that, but they think it's just hogs and coyotes in the woods. I didn't drive myself, so I'm stuck here." He asks if I can come to get him. I talk to my wife and ask her what she thinks, and she says I should go get him. Listen, we are talking about an 8-hour drive. However, I got on the road. Little did I know, while I was racing to Phoenix, Louisiana, they were under siege from these things in Louisiana. Imagine leaving your house at 10 p.m. with the mindset that you are going to drive through the night until the sun comes up. Now, add in the fact that your bedtime is 9:30 p.m. and you never stay up past midnight. Well, that is what I was facing. I carried my shotgun with me and my Bible, figured that would be about all I needed. No extra clothes, no extra underwear, just me and the open road. Things went well until about 2:45 a.m. I'm on Highway 67 just south of Winfield, Louisiana. I'm driving the speed limit when I see this cop behind me with his lights on. At first I'm thinking, okay, this is a trooper and there is an emergency, so he is gonna come speeding past me. Right? Well, wrong. He gets right up on my tail and pulls me over, jumps out of the car, moving fast, flashlight in hand, shining it inside my truck. Then he bangs on the window and demands that I get out. Now, I'm not sure what kind of emotional roller coaster this guy is on. Being a former cop, I understand that we are all just men. For all I knew, he just found out his wife was sleeping with his brother and his dog has cancer. What I did know was that we were all alone on the side of the road and it was 3 a.m. Prime time for some crazy stuff to happen and one of us loses our lives. So I roll the window down, smile and say, "Hey officer, what can I do for you?" That is when I get a good look at his eyes and there is this look of panic and anger. He says, "Sir, please step out." I tell him I'm a retired cop and I have done nothing that requires me to step out of my vehicle. Now he is shining the light at the bed of my truck and he says, "Sir, please step out of the vehicle." He nods his head, motioning toward the back of the truck, and I notice he has his hand on his weapon. So I step out and he pulls me to the front of the truck and I'm expecting him to pat me down. Instead, he starts to whisper. He says, "Sir, I pulled you over because I'm not sure what I saw in the back of your truck, but it was freaky and weird. I can't explain it to you. I need to have a closer look." It was right there, in that moment, I was shown something. Call it a vision, call it whatever you want. But it was a spider jumping from one part of a web to another. And as he walked away, God spoke and said, "Stop him." "Sir," I said, "1 second. I don't think you should check it alone. I have my shotgun. We will go together." He said I could come with him, but he didn't want me with the shotgun, so we went, circled around the driver's side of my truck, headed to the back. Then we didn't have these hard-top covers like people do today. We had the soft-top truck bed covers, and as we are moving, he shines the light, and that soft black cloth cover is moving. As he shifts that light around, we notice it has a slit in it like it's been cut open with a knife, in an arching motion. You know how in those movies they have those jump scare scenes that make you almost poop your pants? It was lining up to be one of those moments for the two of us, but this was way worse than any movie. Because this long, skinny, pale forearm comes out of that slit. And the craziest thing was the closer it got to the wrist, the wider and bigger things got. The wrist was wide and the hands were wide and the fingers were long and thick. The forearm is so long that this thing is feeling around, reaching over the side of the bed of the truck like it's searching. The two of us look at each other and he signals, "Yeah, you better get that shotgun." So I tiptoe open the door, grab the shotgun. We were in the process of signaling what we were going to do to make sure that we would not be in a crossfire when, not if, but when, we started shooting, when this thing comes tearing through the fabric. Listen, I have seen a lot. I mean, a lot of terrifying, pardon my language, stuff in the woods, but this was something I had never seen. From the trunk emerges a gaunt, pale, humanoid creature, almost translucent with these deep, sunken eyes. But it hung from the bones as if it had this flexibility. It's hard to explain. But what was most terrifying was its head was upside down. It had these sunken-in black eyes. It's looking at us, and its mouth is moving up and down like it's talking, and its teeth are making this clacking noise, a chatter. Then it leaps, while looking down at us, off and at an angle, landing 25 feet to the right off the edge of the tree line next to the road, and then blends in with the trees. Understand by blending in, I mean it's there, the light is on it, and then it blends in right in front of us and disappears. When I tell you that the cop looks at me with this look of fear unlike anything I have ever seen, it was like his heart was about to stop beating. This man was no more than 26 years old. His face was turning blue. It was like he was experiencing heart failure. He stumbles back towards his car, and he is just looking at me. I say, "Are you okay?" And he says, "I don't know what I just saw." Listen, then this cop walks around to his car, gets in the vehicle, and leaves me standing there on the side of the road in the darkness. I'm like, okay, I'm getting the hell out of here. We're going to pause right here, and let me explain something to you, or better yet, let me ask you a question. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where it seems like all hell is breaking loose on all sides? I mean, in every aspect of your life, things are going wrong. Your health, your finances, your relationships. It's an attack on your life. I mean that definitively. I had no clue that what was taking place at this moment was one of the worst attacks my family and I would ever experience. By family, I mean everyone you have heard me speak of in this story. However, this was the launch of an attack unlike anything I have ever seen. While I was on the side of the road, Gordon was under siege, and if that was not bad enough, back home, my wife was calling Warren to come to the house because something was beating on the back door. When she went to take a look, it looked exactly like what I had just encountered. However, in that moment, I didn't know that was going on, and she had no way of contacting me. Down in the swamps of Louisiana, Gordon was wide awake. He had already vehemently expressed his desire to leave, and the other two men thought he was going crazy. That was until the walking on the roof of the cabin started. We are talking about the swamps of Louisiana, raised cabins on stilts 12 feet in the air, making the rooftops 30 feet above the ground. It was when that walking, the sound of wood bending, started that they decided that something might be going on and all met up in the living room. Gordon told them the best thing to do was to wait and leave at sunrise, and even then, there was no way to guarantee they would be safe. However, most men, those who have never seen strange things, underestimate the danger of the supernatural. Call it arrogance, call it pride, I call it stupidity. Well, that combination reared its ugly head, and William, the man who drove them down there, decided to go outside with a rifle. Imagine for a moment the front door opens to pitch blackness, and according to Gordon, he knew it was a huge problem when the light from the flashlight scanned the water. Alligators' eyes glow red at night, this bright red. Well, when that light shines over the swamp, there are 15 alligators in the water, some on the left and others on the right. However, in between are 3 sets of eyes glowing this amber yellow. Gordon knew right then in that moment they were in major trouble. What made it worse was these bright red eyes of the gators were all looking at the amber eyes, and the amber eyes were looking right at the front door. There was a swath of land, about 50 feet before the water's edge, just enough for the steps to be placed. Those amber eyes were 20 yards away from the water's edge. Gordon told me that he knew this was a setup. So I tell William to come back inside. There was this porch, and you know how when there is a covered porch, there is an edge of the roof, right? Well, Williams is walking towards that edge of the covered porch, and you can hear something is above. So Gordon grabs him and pulls him back, and William starts to tussle with him, calling him crazy. This goes on for a few seconds, Gordon staying close to the entrance to the door, when you hear this splash of water. Gordon said they heard and felt this thing jump from the roof. He was not sure if the earth gave way when it landed on the ground, but all he knew at that moment was something jumped from the roof and hit the water. When he shone his light, he saw its back, black fur, and this giant hump. That was enough, and he said, "Screw it." Ran inside to the room he had, closed the door, and he started praying. He said it took a moment for the other 2 guys to comprehend what they were seeing. But when they did, he said the sounds they made, these men, those sounds of fear were unlike anything he ever heard. Then there was a slamming of the door and the furniture moving and just all this commotion. Gordon said he knew the only thing that could help them was God. Now here is the weird thing, according to Gordon. He was praying, his adrenaline was pumping, fear raging, and then the next thing he knew, he was asleep. Woke up the next morning on the floor, back hurting, feet numb, below hurting, and when he walked out of the room, the other 2 men looked like they had been rode hard and hung up wet. They just looked at him and said, "How could you sleep through that, all that growling and splashing?" According to Gordon, he heard nothing. They took Gordon up to the local store and left him there. He said the fear on these 2 men was so intense that they could barely speak. When I finally arrived, he was at a small diner having coffee. He tells me this entire story of what happened, and he is laughing as he explains. When he was praying, he said, "Lord, I can't take this. I don't want to die like this. I feel so much fear. I just wish I could go to sleep and you fast forward to when it's time for me to go home." He is laughing and says that's exactly what happened. Little did I know that while Gordon and I were okay, my wife, son, and Warren were under siege in a way I would have never imagined was possible. Little did I know that while Gordon and I were having coffee, my son was lost in the woods. The night before, my wife had called Warren over because something was beating on the back door. Warren described the scene like this. He said it was a struggle to stay standing, like a force was pulling it back away from the house, and that it would eventually be pulled back to the woods. It would get a running start, and you could see it struggling to move forward like it was fighting an invisible wind. He said it was crazy, and at first he was afraid looking at this 7-foot-tall creature. When the fear hit him, he decided that he was not going to give in. He asked my wife for the shotgun, loaded it, opened the back door to go out. And as he crossed the threshold, he felt what was like an invisible giant hand on his chest holding him back. He pressed forward and was pushed back, and the door closed on its own. Now, he and my wife stood there looking as this thing struggled and was forced right back to the edge of the wood line. It was like it was being held there, and then the door opened on its own. Now, to be clear, I have a giant sliding glass door. This door slides open on its own, and Warren said in that moment this rage came over him. It was like he was soaked in anger. It was in his bones, in his chest. His feet were burning. And he just ran out the door, screaming, ran as fast as he could, raised that shotgun, and started shooting. When the first shot hit, a chunk of flesh flew off its shoulder, and he said this look of fear came across its face like it didn't expect to be hurt. So he shot again, this time in the leg, and the entire leg flies off, and it falls to the ground and starts to crawl away. Warren said all he saw in that moment was red in his peripherals, like he was looking through goggles with red paint on them. He said it was dark back there, but he could clearly see this thing, and he shot it in the back, exploding pieces of it all over the place, and it was still moving. He fired again, hitting it in the head, and then it stops, turns, starts to walk back to the house, and he sees out of the corner of his eye the Indian that I had been seeing, and he says this anger wells up again inside of him, and he says, "I rebuke you, wicked spirit. In the name of Jesus Christ, our lives are not for your entertainment," and it turns into a ball of light and folds in on itself. Then he goes back inside, and the second he crosses the threshold, all the anger is gone, but his body feels like it's been connected to a 9,000-watt generator, and he knew he was not sleeping that night. The house settled down, and when the sun comes up, he falls asleep on the sofa, only to be awakened by my wife panicking at 8:15, asking where my son is. Stop, pause, I want you to realize something. I have not mentioned the name of my wife or my son. That is done intentionally, and I think I should warn you, starting at this moment. I have watched how people behave in this field, the creators, some of the listeners. Their immoral behavior, the downright devilish acts that you people, talking to the ones who behave that way, that behavior is appalling. So, I will say this to you right now, you may be able to find where we are and you have free will to come. However, if any of you show up, or talk about my family, or attack us in any way, especially if you leave where you are to come here, I will view it as God's judgment against you. I will take your life and send you to meet him, because in my mind, he brought you here for judgment. Back to the story, my wife is in a full panic, and Warren is awakened to her screaming for my son. When his eyesight clears up, he notices that the back door is open. She explains to him that when she woke up and went to his room, he was not there. When she came down, the door was open. However, it wasn't wide open. It was slid just enough for a child to get out. Now, mind you, I have no clue what is going on, and there is no way to reach me. So Warren and my wife venture into the woods. This was my wife's first time being in the woods, something I didn't let her do. The Bible says we as men are to cover and protect our wives. Under the circumstances, she and I had an agreement the only time she was ever to go into those woods was if it was an extreme emergency, and this qualified as such. She told me that the second she stepped foot into the woods, she heard grunting like things were talking to each other, things she could not see, and it was terrifying. But she was not leaving our son in the woods alone. The two of them walked for 20 minutes, calling his name, gripped in panic before she remembered something that Liz told her. Liz said that the love of a wife and a mother conquers all things, and that love covers a multitude of sins. So she stopped, took her shoes off, and stood still. Warren was still in a full panic, and she prayed, saying, "Father, I'm not sure what happened to my son, where he is, or if something has taken him, but I trust you fully. I trust your love for me and our family. So I will not be brought into doubt about his safety. I refuse to be brought into fear. Father, I ask, according to your word, where you say to make our petitions and requests known to the Lord. Father, I ask that you have these woods return my son safely to us." She said it was right then and there, with their eyes closed. She could see him walking with this tall man, 12 feet tall. She knew in that moment it was an angel with him. The man looked at her, and his eyes shined like fire, raised his hand and motioned for her to come. So she walked, and as she was walking, Warren was freaking out. "Where are you going? We need to go this way." She calmly looked at him and said, "He is fine, Warren, and he is this way." They walked for another 300 yards and saw him standing there, talking to what looked like a tree. I mean, he was having a full-on conversation with this tree, asking, "So, how long have you been here?" When he spotted his mom, he took off running. Warren told me they ran to him, and when he looked back up, the tree that he was talking to was not there. He said it freaked him all the way out. When they got him back to the house, nothing was wrong with him, not even a scratch, and he just told them about the adventure he had in the woods. Earlier, he thought he heard his mom calling him to come outside, so he went. Then he heard her voice in the woods, so he went. But once he got in the woods, this tall man stopped him. He went on to describe this man as having pretty eyes, and that the man told him it was not his mother. But he did not listen, so he kept walking, and the man followed him. He said he got to where the creek is, and then the voice calling him changed. He said it sounded scary, so he started to run. And the man told him not to run, just walk with him, and he would protect him, so he walked with him, and the voice went away, and they talked about the woods. Then he excitedly said, "He showed me that there are monkeys in the woods, Mom." Well, he showed me the young ones. They are big, but are babies. They are not human, but they are not bad. He told me that the young ones know me and watch me when I go outside. Then he asked if I wanted to see something cool. I told him yes, and he made a tree open its eyes. Excitedly, he said, "Mom, do you know that trees can sing and that the grass can sing?" It was amazing. They all started to sing. Then he told me you were looking for me and that you were afraid and worried and that we needed to walk back, but we were far away and he would get us back fast. I was talking to him, then looked over, and there you were. My son goes on to tell my wife how much he loved her, and the entire time, according to Warren, he was sitting there with his head about to explode. So when I finally got home, this is the story that I was met with. Part of me was angry, but the other part of me was so grateful that my son was okay. When I asked him the man's name, he said that he didn't have a name. He told him to call him a servant. Then he says, "Daddy, what's a servant? Is it a slave?" "No, son, not this guy. He was no slave. He was an angel." The look that came across my son's face was priceless. Over the next few days, I would catch him talking to himself, or so I thought, and when I asked, he said he was talking to the servant. I wanted to make sure that it was not a wicked spirit or something trying to deceive my son. So I turned on some of that old school gospel music that Liz used to play, turned it up real loud, and my son starts dancing around the house and clapping. And I ask what he is doing, and he says, "Servant and him are dancing." I turn off the music, leave the room, and come back, and he is still dancing. And I say, "Son, the music is off." And he says, "No, it's not. I can hear it, and the servant wants you to know that he understands why you put it on and that you should play it outside sometimes and see what happens." In that moment, I was thrown aback, but I decided to try it. I took the speaker. Back then, they had these thin wires, and carried it outside and turned on the gospel music and just played it and came inside. Went to the bathroom. Was talking about just a quick glimpse. Went to the bathroom. When I came back out, I got a glimpse of the man he was talking about, just a quick glimpse, and it freaked me out because he was looking at me, smiling, and he looked like a grown-up version of my son, except he was the perfect specimen, slender but muscular. It was amazing. This was the start of my son having encounters in the woods and the beginning of the woods, keying in and focusing on him. Warren calls it the targeting of the next generation. He took it personally, remembering the things he experienced when he was a little boy. This only brought my two sons closer, and indeed they would need to be close because I was about to go through a bout with sickness. When I say that I was about to face a bout of sickness, I would like you to understand that this came from nowhere. I was healthy, no blood pressure issues, no heart problems, nothing abnormal at all. Then one day, I just felt sick. It was like I was walking in water and mud. Every movement was labored. The first few days, I figured I needed some rest. So I just took it easy, but then it only got worse. So much so that I went to the doctor, and they ran a bunch of tests but found nothing abnormal. It was like my body was being toyed with. Fatigue, overall weakness. Things I had never felt in my life, and I'm not talking about due to stress or old age. It was like my body was breaking down at a rapid pace. The juxtaposition was my son was becoming more and more active and wanted to be outside more. During this time period, I thanked the Lord for Warren. The two of them would spend a lot of time together. As much as I wanted to teach my son about what was in those woods, the duty fell to Warren, and he was up for the task. Stop right here, pause, and let me say this to you. What I would later learn is that what I was going through was called my body being afflicted. This was something I learned during my conversations with James. You know him as Dark Waters. I think I need to explain something to you about the agreement that he signed to get this story to you. The reason why this story is being read by a computer is because I have dictated each and every word. These are my words, and this computer is replacing my voice. Granted, he is the most talented storyteller there is on YouTube, but I wanted complete control over details about my family for our safety. So when I say this, it's me talking, not him. There are men of God, and then there are godly men. James is a godly man. That means that the Spirit of God lives inside of him and functions through him. How do I know this? Because over the years, I have met many men like him. Men who have been tamed by God. Warriors, fighters, vicious individuals that God has taken residence inside of them and made them anew. I want to thank him publicly for the amount of leverage he has given me in sharing this story and say this to the Christian audience. I have watched him be persecuted for being a Christian online, watched people lie about him, steal from him, do everything to destroy him, and in the face of it all, the Lord has blessed him. This too is a form of affliction, and Jesus said that it would happen to those who believed in him. Now I say all of that to say this. In Psalms 34:19, it says, "Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivereth him out of them all." So you see, persecutions and afflictions, know and understand where the deliverance from it comes. It comes from the Lord. Now back to the story. So while I was dealing with health problems, the two of them, Warren and my son, were off into the woods on these adventures. The first adventure that I can remember was when Warren told me that my son had taken him to where the baby monkeys lived. Warren told me that the boy just walked into the woods and was moving around like he had a map in his head. They worked their way up this hill, and at the top was a plateau, 75 yards across. He said my son just sat down on the ground and said, "They will be back. Let's give them some time." Within 15 minutes, he said he heard what sounded like birds making noises, but the bird sounds were slightly off and breathy. Then my son stood up and starts to look around. Warren says he then sees what looked like something from Planet of the Apes, peeping from behind a tree, and my son just waves and then it hides. This game of hide and seek goes on with multiple ape-looking creatures until they hear a heavy grunt off in the distance. He looks at Warren and says, "Well, playtime's up, the adults are coming back, we need to go." So the two of them leave. As they are working their way back, Warren asks him how he knows about those things, and he explains that Servant taught him. So he asks if Servant told him anything about the wolves, the big one, and he says yes. My son tells him that not all the wolves are bad, but they all do have bad things that talk to them in their ears. Sometimes those bad things can get them to do bad things. He says it's best just to stay away from them, but the monkeys, bad things talk to them too, but they don't listen as much as the wolves do. The way Warren described the conversation was straightforward and matter-of-fact, like the kid knew what he was saying was true, no hint of doubt. Then there came a stormy night when I realized that my son had learned a lot more than I could have ever conceived. I was going through this phase of my affliction where body parts were just not working the way they should. For example, there were days when my legs were so weak I could not walk. The next morning I would wake up and walk fine. Then there were other days where it was my right arm. Well, that entire day, it was my legs that were just exhibiting crazy weakness, pain. I could barely walk. When at 1 a.m., it's storming outside, and I hear this growling outside. And I already know the wolves, not sure why they are here. They had been quiet, no activity at all. I was wondering why they would come. When I hear the door to our bedroom opening, and my son walks in and says, "Daddy, I need to use your window." This kid walks over to the window, opens it, and says, "Why are you listening to those bad things? Return to your home. Go. You don't belong here." He closes the window, climbs in bed with me and my wife, and goes to sleep, and all the noise stops, and I just lay there in tears, crying, trying to be silent. Do you know what it feels like to be helpless? And your son, a child, stands up and faces things that most men would find terrifying. It was such a mix of emotions. I was proud, but I was ashamed and angry because it was my job to protect this family and because I was not able to. That was a night where I was almost broken, and doubt came in. You know, like, God, why is this happening to me? I didn't want any of this. However, I caught myself and realized what had just happened was wonderful. I was not going to let something weigh me down and make me feel bad, so I closed my eyes and rested. Not slept, just rested. The next morning, we woke late, 11 a.m. It was like everyone was in a slumber except my son. He was already up and moving around. School started in a few days, and he was trying to have as much fun before he had to go, so he and Warren went back into the woods again. It was when he went off to school that I really realized my son was being followed by the things here in the woods, both good and bad. It was the third day of school. He said they were playing football at recess, and one of the kids went over into the woods to get the football after another kid kicked it and came out saying there were a bunch of monkeys in the woods looking at them. This would be a recurring theme when it came to him, them growing up watching him and him acknowledging their presence. Fast forward a year, and I'm still dealing with sickness, the only way to describe it, and no one knows what is going on. One day I'm reading the Bible and I stumble across that scripture about affliction, and I just say, "Lord, your word says you will deliver me from them all. Why haven't you kept your word?" In that moment, I hear, "I am my word. Have you asked me according to my word?" I realize in that moment I prayed, sure, asked for help, but never did I support that prayer with what he said. So I say, "Lord, according to your word, you will deliver me from all affliction, and I hold you to your word, Lord, deliver me." 2 days later, I felt like the old me. It was amazing, and it was great to be back to myself again because things were only going to get more interesting when we found out that Jewel was pregnant.